Hi there, everyone. Shane here.
Hi.
Oh, Mark, hi. Welcome on board. I had a couple of questions for you directly before we get the meeting officially started. One was, we're going to have a mini summit on the 14th, which will be taking place in the morning in Pacific. I think it's around 7 in the morning. I was wondering if you might be able to join at
Yeah,
7
the
or
main
9.
reason why I'm calling tonight or entering, coming
Yeah.
here is to find out about that. Sure. The question I have is how much time, what topic and how much time do you need?
Right. Suggestion, we work on execution around the security guidance document and try to get the first variant finished. Time available up to 2 hours. And all we need is really to get a status update of where we're at with the security thinking and what we need to do to execute. Is there any way we would be able to realistically live edit, do you think, for the event?
Sure, we can do that. Hopefully there's enough people there with background on security to get a live discussion going. So
Awesome. Okay, I will set that up. I'm guessing here, wild guess, you might prefer to start in the second hour of the event, so around 8 a.m. Pacific.
that's a good guess. Yes, that would be preferred.
All right, so I'll have us do education team for the first hour, if that's okay with Balakrishna, and then we're going to do up to 2 hours on getting the security extension ready.
Sure.
Yes, we can go ahead.
Oh, wonderful, Balakrishna. Thank you. All righty. So we are going to focus a lot on the education material today. Before we do that, I'm just going to share our usual antitrust policy notice. Bear with me as I scroll through hundreds of thousands of screens. This should be it. So before we formally get started, our antitrust policy notice, as usual, is shown. We have our full policy on the website, and if someone is a Linux Foundation member company representative, you can contact our counsel, Andy Updegrove. Right, if there's no questions about that, we zoom into the main part of the meeting. On my board meeting, we just confirmed our trademark in the UK and our trademark in Taiwan. So that's why the board slides have officially been filled with party popper symbols. Oh, and Synopsys is our global third-party certifier. That news is going out across the wires at the moment. But what we're focusing on is our reference training for OpenChain ISO 5230. I'll be honest with you guys, I'm struggling to pull this together. I know everyone's struggling to pull this together because we're so busy with everything. What I've been trying to do is to grab the existing material and completely rewrite it as Magdalena wanted us to in a narrative format. Now, Balakrishna and everyone else has already done most of the foundation work on this. I've just been trying to run through it one more time and get a short narrative version that maybe we can just pass over to LF training and they'll finally be happy with that. I've shared the link with you in the chat of this talk. But just to show you what I've done, there's a lot of comments on the side, and rather than focusing on the comments, I've focused on the material we've got and rewritten it into paragraphs. And you can see strike through where I took something like copyright concepts in software was completely rewritten into 2 short paragraphs here. And that's what I've been up to. I've been going through it a bit, and I wanted to turn over to Balakrishna and get your perspective on how that's going, whether that's a suitable approach, and how do we continue that? Do we just task me to go through it all, or do we do some co-editing today and so on? Balakrishna, can I hand over to you, and do you want screen share?
Sure, Shane. Thank you. So,
I'll turn off my screen share then, so you've got the full control.
yes, thank you. I'm just sharing my screen.
There we go.
Okay.
It's great.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. Hello, everyone. Shane, as you suggested, if we could go with co-editing today, I think that would make a lot more sense because yes, I know it would be faster if we do editing offline, but seems like it's not exactly working out in our favor because of all the time constraints what we have. Yeah, and there was one question from my end, Shane. So the points system, it was not fine with the training course, is it?
Right. So basically, we're getting there. And they just said they want more narrative. So that's where I started trying to put all the bullet points into paragraphs and just make it nice and short. This is accompanied by another suggestion from me, which is that we have quite a lot of material across 8 chapters. So perhaps we can carve out, say, the first 3 chapters as the first version of the course. In other words, if we complete the first few chapters, we get that published as the first version of the course, and then we iterate, adding the other chapters one by one every couple of weeks.
Sure, we can do that because anyway, all the supporting material for every chapter, all the supporting material is ready. Just that we have to convert the points into narration. So I think it should be faster if we have more helping hands. We could finish it in a matter of days.
Right, and if we do take this approach, let's see, chapter 1 is rights and licensing, chapter 2, introduction to open source licenses, and chapter 3, introduction to open source compliance. Those 3 chapters should be plenty to quite literally have an introduction to open source licensing course start.
True.
We might not want LF to give certification on the first 3 chapters launched. But we could start the training program online, and we could initially call it the Introduction to Open Source Licensing course, and then build it out into the full reference training.
Yes. Yes, Shane, makes a lot of sense.
If we're doing some co-editing today, I had a suggestion. We can just assign to each other a couple of pieces to co-edit. And take that. The easiest thing is probably to find a bullet point. Let me just give you an example. In chapter 2, I think, in chapter 2, there's a thing under notices. And notices has got kind of 1 paragraph, and then it has 3 bullet points. And if someone could take care of that, turning that into maybe 2 paragraphs. And then if someone could attack permissive open source licenses, and someone could attack the license reciprocity, and then someone could attack proprietary license or closed source, we would just end up with a bunch of paragraphs done today, which would be relatively easy to move ahead with.
Just a query here. Isn't the notices part already done? Because it looks like the first paragraph gives a hint of what notices should consist of, and rest of them look like examples.
Yep.
Or
and the way I'd run with that would just be to change the second like this. And then, I'll work and finish notices. I'll take that.
Okay, so we are going that way, then probably I can take up. What can I take up? Yeah, I think in chapter 1 I can take up licenses.
Right. Licenses is another bullet point. Does anyone want to take patent concepts in software in chapter 1? It's 4 bullet points to turn into 1 paragraph. Everyone's super quiet. Everyone's like, not me. Well, I mean, if no one wants to work on something right now, that's totally fine. Balakrishna and I can keep running at this. If we all agree that the concept is 3 chapters, the bullet points are converted into little paragraphs. And our goal here is to have a minimal viable product of the training course available for LF training, because we're finding it overwhelming to do all 8 chapters.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to look at one of the other sections. It's just, you know, patents. I'm not a patent lawyer, so I'm always uncomfortable doing patents.
All righty, how about chapter 3, open source compliance goals? It's like 3 bullet points.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can work on that.
Right. I'm muddling through on chapter 2 notices right now. It's a pity it's impossible to have multiple screen shares on Zoom.
Yeah, that would have been more helpful.
Wouldn't it be cool? I'd love that. So it notices what I'm doing with the bullet points is there was that 1 sentence overview of the bullet points. And now I'm going to do a couple of sentences just giving examples for each bullet point. Or I would if my computer hadn't crashed. I'm finished with the notices file in chapter 2, so I'm moving on to permissive open source licenses. As I get rid of bullet point lists, I'm just marking them out with strike through and gray so that it's pretty clear that they're, well, they've been taken outside and shot.
Hi Shane, Gautam here.
Hi, how are you
Hi,
doing?
good. Yeah, so basically, I just try to look into the comments, and I can add some points to chapter 3, introduction section, chapter
That would
overview.
be brilliant.
Yeah, I'll just add it. Let me know. I'll just do that now. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. I'm just working on chapter 2 at the moment. I finished the permissive open source licenses, so now I'm working on license reciprocity and copyleft licenses. I'm just going to start that now. The great thing is that by moving to narrative form, and I saw Yari just shared some narrative form stuff over at To-Do Group. Thank you, Yari, that's fantastic. We're most of the way there. These bullet points turn into narrative relatively quickly. And given that we're going to only use the first 3 chapters to get started, the end is in sight. After that, perhaps we can release a chapter every 2 weeks or every month until we have all 8 out there. I'm on to proprietary license or closed source in chapter 2. So really cooking here.
Okay, I'm done with licenses.
Very cool.
What do I need next? Okay, now I'm taking multi-licensing from chapter 2.
Okay, cool. That's super cool. Because I'm going to be doing license compatibility just above you in a second. So we're meeting.
Yes.
On license compatibility now.
Okay, I'm done with multi-licensing.
Oh, fast. I'm still on license compatibility. I need more time on that one.
No problem. License compatibility is big.
And it's like Mark Twain had a thing where he wrote a large letter and said, apologies for sending such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one. Editing is time consuming.
Right, just starting on implementing compliance practices.
Super cool. Thanks, Andrew.
Okay, so I'll take up what compliance obligations must be satisfied.
Oh, okay, awesome. I'm back in chapter 2. I'm messing around with license use cases related to open source software and specifically a description of open source licenses. Basically, that's the start of the chapter.
Shane, I see you're editing this use cases related to open source software, and I see that a little bit below there's this OSI definition of open
Yes.
source, but we don't have the FSF definition of open source. I don't know, do we want to mess around with that as well, or just leave it out?
Now, this is one that came up before, and it's a very good question. In practice, most businesses use the open source definition, which is why
Yeah.
it was listed here as frequently used. Maybe
Yeah.
add a note that there are other definitions, such as the Free Software Foundation definition. Would that make sense?
Yeah, because I think they have like 4 rules, or however you call them, and OSI has these 10.
Yeah, the 4 freedoms. I think the
Right.
the issue with this, Yari, is that because the definition that we actually use in the specification is significantly broader, and it talks about the OSI definition, and then it also talks about all similar licenses, which makes perfect sense in the context of the definition, because obviously when we're running a compliance process, there's a probability that we'll be using code in there that isn't strictly open source from an OSI perspective. So, for
Correct.
example, you could argue that Creative Commons licensed code, for example, comes under that category. So we need to make sure that that's included. But I think this is something that we talked about in the context of the next release of the specification, is whether we should actually think of changing the definition within the specification. So it says something like open source like or open source adjacent, or I mean, those are both very bad terms, but we can come up with something better, because I have noticed that there have been a few examples of people taking the OpenChain definition of open source as being a definitive definition of open source, which I think is potentially quite dangerous. So I don't think there's not a lot we can do about that at the moment, but I think we need to look at it when it comes to the next release of the specification. But it's just worth bearing that point in mind, I think, while we're doing the supporting materials.
Yeah, because there's all sort of open source, let's say there's OSI definition, but then there are like tons of other things that if you are running a compliance program, you need to comply with those as well.
Exactly.
So some whatever it is, like source available, common clause, whatever it is, you need to comply.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah.
Is it like OSI open source, or not? It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Over time, we're probably going to have to make additional explanation for open source adjacent but not open source licenses like MongoDB and so on.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we keep it
SSPL, it's not OSI open source, but still you need to comply with that.
Yeah.
Easy. So, and we're under what kind of bucket that just falls under? It's just like source available licenses, or is the official name for those?
We don't have one yet. I think we can ask Heather Meeker, because she's the one who helped write some of those licenses. I think she wrote MongoDB. I can ask. I think there's only 3 at the moment, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, but there's also sort of similar licenses that we need to bear in mind that are technically proprietary licenses, but allow for free redistribution. But things that, I mean, there's quite often sort of plugins for databases and this sort of thing where you're not allowed to actually modify the underlying code, but you can incorporate it into your open source product if you want to.
And we also have something, the Mulan license. The permissive Mulan is an OSI license, but the Mulan public license is not. And I need to find out precisely why it's not, because they're on the 2nd variant already in China. Not sure what that license does or does not do, so I'll have to talk with people over at OSI and see what's cooking there. In other words, it sounds like the age of 1 or 2 simple definitions of open source is over. And now we have to have yes, but.
Yeah.
On this topic, I'm actually looking at killing a sentence in chapter 2, which says open source licenses by definition make source code available under the terms that allow for modification and redistribution. BSD doesn't, and MIT doesn't.
They do.
But only on the initial point, right?
Yeah, but it's not open source anymore once you've closed it. So
Okay.
I mean, I would say, I'd probably say something like strict, open source license, because again, that's not true of licenses under the OpenChain open source definition.
Very good point. So maybe just by necessity, this means that source code for the software is made available, and just leave it at that. And then when people say, but I didn't get the source code with my Postgres SQL database, just be like, yeah, well, that was step 2 of distribution, and it's not copyleft. So there you go. Okay. Thanks, Andrew, for that.
No problem.
Okay, I'm done with what compliance obligations must be satisfied. Next.
Once I was working through a whole bunch of stuff with Armine, I think as we wrote our GPL book, and we both decided after a certain point that we should give up this open source thing and just become farmers or something. Enough for
Can totally understand that.
Yeah, it's a close call. It still might happen.
I think there are a lot of duplications here.
Yeah, we probably should be merciless in destroying the duplications, because what's happening is this course is getting a lot tighter, more focused, and therefore, where in the past we might duplicate something from chapter to chapter because people could wander a bit, I don't think they'll be wandering with their attention anymore. It's a very short distance from chapter 1 to chapter 3.
Yeah.
So Yari, just so you know, what I've done on license use cases related to open source software, as I talk about open source licenses, is say that there can be licenses. Oh yeah, first of all, the OSI definition. This lists 10 criteria that determine whether a license qualifies as open source or not. And then the next sentence, there can be licenses that are very similar to open source licenses, but do not meet all 10 of these criteria. And that gives us the avenue to later come back to the other types of licenses.
Yep. It's a good one. Yeah.
Hi. So is there any code usage policy section is there in this training?
I don't think we have one per se. No, people have to look for the policies elsewhere.
Okay.
We could and should refer to the open source policy template to help people build their own, which is part of our compliance library.
So something like basic rules when incorporating open source into the projects, right? Like statements like do not mix original and open source code. Do not use GPL code, something like that. Is there any reference that is being
We
given?
do have a little bit of reference to that. Chapter 2, software license compatibility, explains those integrations. Chapter
Yes,
2.
and also Gautam, long-standing discussion has been here that we do not provide any legal suggestions or advices that people should be following. Rather, this should just be a point where they can read upon and take the points back to their own organization lawyers to discuss further on how to use the code.
Okay.
There's actually a duplication at the beginning of chapter 2 about software license compatibility, and then the actual section on software license compatibility. So I'm not going to include the beginning part on that topic. It's just a reiteration.
Yes. And I also removed one duplication here. What compliance obligations must be satisfied? I have removed the duplicate part and I've merged whatever other points I had added.
Well, that's great. Yeah. Chapter 2 is nearly done.
I think now we have very less points. I'll take up open source compliance issues distribution.
Meanwhile, I'm back in chapter 1 working on patent concepts in software. Amazing to think I spent 6 years on the patent side in software. The time flew. Goodness. It's quite hard to describe patents when you think someone might have no idea what a patent is. It's heartbreakingly hard.
Right, I'm going to have to pop off now, folks, but I've sort of reached up to what compliance obligations must be satisfied. But I think
Fantastic.
somebody else is working on that. So
we've really gone through a lot here. Thanks, Andrew. And yeah, I mean, everyone, we're hitting the top of the hour. So I gather everyone will be heading for the hills. But we're almost there. We're almost there. This is fantastic. And I can help finish this off and share the final draft with you.
that's
all.
fantastic. Brilliant. Okay. Thanks all.
And, have a lovely
Thank you,
day.
Andrew.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Have a nice day.
You too.
Well,
Bye-bye.
shall we wrap up there for the work team?
Just a question, like Shane, because now you said you're writing on the patents. Because
Yes.
what's the situation now in Europe? Because I know that there was some time that software per se cannot be patented.
Yes, yes. So the situation in Europe is that software cannot be patented, but algorithms can, which effectively is the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I
think
remember like some time ago when I was working for Nokia and we thought, oh, should we make a patent out of this? And I'm like, well, sorry.
Yeah, I think what's fascinating in Europe is that you have to just describe it as an algorithm as opposed to software to get the grant, and then you can just use it as if it was a software patent. It's a very strange loophole.
Yeah, because I remember, I think, we had some discussion, but that's a long time ago, and, things may have changed,
Things may
several
have changed.
times already.
No, there's,
But
in this
I
case,
think we talked with a patent engineer or something, and like, oh, no, we have this, whatever. It was something with the DSP. I can't remember exactly what it was. But then, I can't even remember the gender. He or she said that, oh, yeah, but, this is software, so you cannot do it. All right, whatever.
it's it's such an interesting thing on patents. And after working on the patent cross-licensing front and negotiating patent fees, most of the companies are simply using patents in negotiation as a counterbalance.
Yeah.
So whether it's called a software patent or an algorithm patent, it's just useful in the discussion so everybody doesn't bother everybody else. And it's a very expensive ceasefire, but it does work. And even though I'm obviously very much on the side of open source and how things work here, I would advise any company that's facing potentially American or Chinese companies, get as many patents as you can. Because when it comes to the negotiation, it'll be like, well, one company says, I have this many patents, and the other company says, I have that many patents.
Yeah.
And out of that will be determined who pays who the license. And usually no one. I mean, usually it's just a case of both companies say, well, fair enough, we leave each other alone.
Yeah. Well, then we come to the patent piece as well with the open source licenses, which is
exactly. Yeah, I mean, you've got the explicit thing with Open Invention Network, where you're explicitly saying none of our patents will be used against core open source. And then you simply have the fact that if you're releasing code under GPL or Apache, you're making a patent grant.
Yeah, it's interesting.
It is. This is pure observation without my official statement hat on. But it seems that in practice, most companies are very comfortable with Apache. And that seems to indicate that most companies are very comfortable with licensing their patents. They're just restricting their right to deal with outside aggressors in practice. It's not like everyone came up with a plan, but that seems to be how the market is evolving.
Yeah.
Right, so I'm going to end the call here so we have the full recording. Oh, and yep, I just saw a note from Osaki-san. Yep, I got your note, Osaki-san. I will drop into a call with you immediately after this. So Osaki-san, maybe you and I can come into this meeting again in a few minutes. Everyone else, I'm switching off the meeting, but that doesn't mean the editing has to be switched off. So, Osaki-san, if you dial in again, I'll have you back on a private call. Balakrishna, thank you for leading this. Yari, thanks for amazing comments. And everyone, thank you. We're nearly done. Amazing.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.